The Glaive Prime is talked about a lot in Warframe as being one of the most, if not the most, broken weapon in the game. Just to buy the Glaive Prime parts, you are currently needing to rake out in excess of 300 platinum, which gets you 4 parts, including the blueprint. This makes it by far the most expensive prime weapon in the game right now, and not only that, but if you want to get a ribbon for it, you'll need to be shelling out 6, 7 or perhaps even 800 platinum soon for a trash or unrolled glaive ribbon. So what is all the fuss about, and is it really worth it? Today we're going to take a look at what makes the Glaive Prime so powerful and see whether or not it's worth the investment. The first thing you need to know when building any weapon in Warframe is what its key strengths are and how it physically performs in combat. The Glaive Prime, being aptly named, is in fact a glaive type weapon, which means it can be thrown at enemies, which is the first mechanic that we are going to be utilising. Now, there are a number of glaives in the game, 10 I believe, so what makes the Glaive Prime so special? Well, if we look at the damage numbers on the Glaive Prime, we can see quite a clear swing towards slash damage. So why is this important? Well, each damage type in Warframe has a corresponding status effect, which I'm sure many of you know. Rather than going into detail on all of them, we're just going to stick to slash, as that's basically what this weapon is all about. Slash damage has a huge damage bonus against fleshy targets without armor, but the aim here is to have this weapon all the way through to level cap in Steel Path missions. So why would a slash weapon be needed for this when armor just goes up and up and up as missions progress? Well, when you manage to proc a status effect using slash damage, you will cause an enemy to bleed, or in the case of a machine, leak oil. The damage that this bleed effect does, or cinematic damage as it's referred to in the code, is not calculated based off of the damage you deal in your initial hit. Rather, the damage is actually calculated before this based on your mods and build without the armor modifier. It's not affected at all by armor modifiers, meaning that where your initial strike may only deal 3 damage to a level 9999 Steel Path Corrupted Heavy Gunner, the bleed proc will tick every second for sometimes hundreds of thousands of damage. Essentially, slash damage's corresponding status effect has the ability to chunk down even the most tanky enemies in the game, which makes it so desirable in most weapons. Now, we've already ascertained that the Glaive Prime favours slash damage, but if we look at the status chance, we can see that on the build we're using here, it's only 30%. Moreover, if we were able to get this to the point where we were guaranteed a slash status proc, we're only going to be doing this damage to one enemy, right? That doesn't seem at all viable against the hordes of enemies you're going to be coming up against in Steel Path. Well, that is where the heavy attack comes in, combined with the fact that the glaive can be thrown, which we discussed earlier. A lot of players like to avoid heavy tanks when it comes to melee, mainly because on most weapons it's a bit janky. But for this build to work, it is necessary. But why? Well, when you throw a glaive type weapon, making sure to fully charge it, the impact of the weapon will force status effects for each element present on the weapon, even though it's not even mentioned here on the stat screen. This, however, only works if the glaive hits a target directly. So we've now managed to overcome the lack of status chance on the build by utilising the glaive's throwing mechanic to force our bleed proc on the target. But how do we now proliferate it to other targets in the area? This is where the heavy attack comes in. If we look at the heavy attack on the glaive, we can see that it has a radius. Enemies are going to be hit by this attack within the shown radius. Now, it's not a big radius, but it's an area of effect nonetheless, and we can use other tools elsewhere in our arsenal to leverage this. Using the glaive's throw then to force a slash status proc, followed by a heavy attack whilst the glaive is mid-flight, will force slash procs onto any enemy units within the heavy attack radius. It's a very useful interaction that allows for the ultimate utilisation of cinematic damage. So with all this in mind, our build is naturally going to reflect a few things. Firstly, we're not using any elemental mods. I'm only interested in the damage being provided by slash, so there is no need to build for other damage types. Secondly, heavy attacks damage is based off of initial combo counter, hence we have mods like Corrupt Charge on. We can also afford to utilise other mods that will improve heavy attacks, such as Killing Blow and Amalgam Organ Shatter, which are both going to improve our heavy attack damage and wind-up speed. We can also focus on mods that affect our thrown melee attacks, since that's all we're going to be using. So we've got Power Throw on here, which can provide a significant 300% boost to damage on thrown attacks, as well as Volatile Quick Return, which is one of the more important aspects of this build as it prevents any bouncing around and essentially enables us to utilise the heavy attack whilst the glaive is in flight. Sacrificial Pressure obviously allows us more crit chance, and hitting a crit will do more damage, so that's a must. And Prime Pressure Point provides straight up damage, so again, it's a must. The last mod we have on here is a faction specific mod. The reason for this is that these mods apply after all other damage calculation has been taken into account. So this Prime Smite Corrupted mod, for example, will multiply our total damage output against corrupted units by 1.55 times. You can obviously sub this out for whatever faction you might be going against. All of this culminates in a ridiculous amount of damage being delivered through our heavy attack and subsequently through cinematic damage being applied by slash status effects. So now we're just going to watch the damage numbers tick down the health of some level 195 Steel Path corrupted heavy gunners, and then we will round out the video. So in that example, we didn't really get to utilise all the perks like consecutive power throws, but I'm sure you get the point. Now I just briefly want to touch upon some of the tools you can use to make grouping enemies together a lot easier and subsequently make it easier to spread your slash procs. Firstly, Magus Anomaly. This is an operator arcane, so it can be used no matter what frame you're running, and it pulls enemies in from a pretty decent distance. Secondly, Korra's Ensnare, which not only pulls enemies together, but essentially paralyzes them, meaning you won't take any damage from them. And thirdly, Nidus's Larvae, which yoinks enemies from across the map. There are a few more, but for me, those are the big three. You can also make use of other frames as well, such as Ash, whose passive increases bleed damage against enemies by 25% and increases the duration by 50%. So finally, is the Glaive Prime really all it's cracked up to be, and is it worth the amount of platinum it currently costs? Short answer is, probably not. Unless you are someone looking to go for hours on end in a single mission, you could get by just fine without it. In fact, I only collected the weapon on this account last week, and I was already Legendary 3 at that point, having completed basically everything in the game. There is no denying, however, that the Glaive's damage output is absurd, and that is why it is favoured by so many players. Its ability to just ignore armour and deal AoE damage is second to none, and if you are someone looking to stay in missions for days, then this is probably a weapon you want to own. We're going to round out the video here, but if you guys want to let me know down in the comments what you think about the Glaive Prime at the moment, I would love to read through it. Perhaps you could let us know what scenarios you use it in and whether you have a neat ribbon for it as well. But for now guys, I'm going to call it a day. If you have enjoyed the video and found it useful, please leave a like and subscribe, and I will catch you in the next one.